Alcoholic fermentation is the process that makes bread rise when ingredients are mixed together. The rising of this bread is due to the amount of CO2 present in the bread, which is released by the yeast, and amounts of CO2 vary across different types of bread. The amount of CO2 is also dependent on bread ingredients. In this experiment, we wanted to figure out what source of sugar would produce the most amount of CO2 in the bread so that the bread would be as fluffy as possible, because the more bread bubbles the bread had, the fluffier it would be.
In this experiment, we first measured out 10 milliliters of water, 0.25 grams of sugar, and 0.5 grams of yeast. We did this 2 times for each type of sugar that was being tested: brown, powdered, and the control, white sugar. We kept these weights the same across all trials. The independent variable was the type of sugar used, and the dependent was how much CO2 was produced. We poured the water, sugar, and yeast into tubes and mixed the ingredients together. We weighed an empty tube and a filled tube so we could find the weight of the ingredients alone. The filled tubes were then placed into a beaker of warm water and allowed to ferment for 10 minutes. We weighed the filled tubes again and subtracted the weight of the tube and the original filling. This showed us how much weight had been lost in CO2, which is important because the amount of CO2 produced can be compared to how much CO2 is produced by the control and corresponds with how fluffy the bread will be, which is the goal of the lab. We chose this procedure because it was the best way to measure escaping gas, as trying to capture it would have given too much experimental error. After we got the amount of CO2 lost for each type of sugar, we averaged the values of the 2 trials and found the average CO2 released for the types of sugar to reduce any experimental error.
When we completed our lab procedure, we found out that the average weight loss in the white sugar solution, which is our control variable, was 1.705 grams. The average weight loss in the powdered sugar solution was 1.425 grams, and the average weight loss in the brown sugar solution was 0.81 grams. The process that occurs when ingredients are mixed together to make bread rise is called alcoholic fermentation. After the fermentation process is complete, the amount of CO2 present in the bread makes bread rise. The more CO2 that is produced, the fluffier the bread will be. Figure 1 shows that the solution containing white sugar had the largest change in mass, which is 1.705 grams. Since it lost 1.705 grams, we can also say that the amount of CO2 produced is 1.705 grams, which is the greatest amount of CO2 produced out of all of the breads we tested. Since white sugar produced the most CO2 out of all of the other sugars, we can conclude that the white sugar will produce the fluffiest bread. But powdered sugar is the best substitute.
In our procedure, there could have been multiple sources of error during our experiment. During the preparation for our experiment, when filling up our beakers, it is very likely that there wasn't the exact same amount of solution and water in each tube. When we started to put our tubes into the water, we started the timing after we put the first tube in and ended the timer when it reached the time limit. This caused some tubes to be in longer than others, leading to the possibility of some reactions not being able to fully run its course. Another source of error could have been when weighing our substances after we took them out of the water. Extra water was on the scale and could have affected the final weight.